NileshOakI. He is a researcher, a speaker, and an author who has used astronomy to date our epics, Ramayana and Mahabharat. So, welcome to the show, Nilesh sir. Glad to have you here.
Namaskar, and glad to be here.
Thank you, sir. So, sir, I think some of us are familiar with your work already. Basically, we've used astronomy to date our epics, which is a groundbreaking work, we can say. So, my first question to you would be, sir, what made you question the conventional timeline of Ramayana and Mahabharat?
Okay, now great question. See, I did not begin with questioning the conventional timeline. In fact, uh, I was directionally aware, and I was also aware that there is no one conventional timeline. See, typically people say traditional timeline or conventional timeline. There is no traditional timeline, there is no conventional timeline to begin with. Now, if we have to approximate for traditional timeline, I will say there is one. I did not, I knew it, but not in a very rigorous sense, which is about 3000 BC. It's like if you ask someone, like a typical Indian, like, hey, how long ago Mahabharat war happened or Mahabharat happened? And typically you will get the answer 5000 years. But I'll tell you how conventional or how careless or casual that answer is. Now, for all practical purposes, it seems to work fine. But that people will say this number 5000 for almost practically anything. Like you say, how old is Indian civilization? They will say 5000 years. How old is Hindu Dharma? 5000 years. How old is Ayurveda? 5000 years. So this is a placeholder, a lazy, careless, casual placeholder that people are using. Possibly, it has to do with another confusion, which is this. If you look at our current calendar, the Panchanga that we use, the epoch that it uses is actually the one that goes back to 5000 years. Now, somewhere, and probably we will not have time to talk about it, but somewhere this confusion happened about 1500 years ago, where the Panchanga epoch, the starting point, the recalibrated starting point for the Panchang, about 3000 years ago, sorry, 3000 BC, 5000 years ago, was confused with the beginning of Kali Yuga, and then all the hell broke loose, basically. So that's a traditional, conventional one. But to answer your question, I did not begin by questioning any traditional or a conventional timing. In fact, my study or my interest in Mahabharata research or Mahabharata dating specifically began with one shlok that I randomly ran into. And I was looking for a Bhagavad Gita as to where exactly it appears in Mahabharata. And I ran into these two chapters or almost three chapters describing just before the Mahabharata war. And this particular description just fascinated me. I mean, actually, it shocked me, surprised me. This is that famous Arundhati walking ahead of Vasishtha. So I was saying, oh wow, this is fascinating because I knew this is back in 1994 that Vasishtha is ahead, Arundhati is behind. That everybody knew, by the way. So Vasishtha walks ahead, Arundhati walks behind. These are two stars of the Saptarshi clusters. And Vyasa is saying exactly opposite. And it's an extremely daring statement because if anybody knows basic astronomy, the person knows that this Saptarshi cluster is extremely stable. And I said, why would Vyas write that? Or, okay, so what could cause this reversal? And that's where I began. Then it took me 15 years to figure this out. So it was solely focused on finding something that was I came across in Mahabharata. Sounds completely impossible, but I had a Shraddha in the words of Vyasa. I had a fascination in astronomy. And I said, wow, this also had a great potential from a scientific point of view, what we call a crucial observation, a crucial evidence. Like, something that you think prima facie impossible, but actually, when you scientifically investigate, it turns out to be possible. Actually, it makes a revolution. So that's how it began. And it made the revolution. That's when I had every reason to question. I don't mean the Mahabharata text evidence basically decisively falsifies anyone's claim that occurs after 5000 BC, period. So anyone claiming Mahabharata happening in the last 7000 years is basically wrong. I mean, we don't need to, go into the details why it is so. I mean, it is required for a scientific investigation, but for a common people, they need to understand if anybody is claiming Mahabharat war happening in the last 7,000 years, look at that claim with suspicion. Go investigate.
And sir, based on the astronomical evidence that you have found out, what is the exact dates that the evidence shows us for both these epics?
So for Mahabharat, the evidence, all the evidence, there are about 300 astronomy descriptions, 300 plus astronomy descriptions that are spread throughout the Mahabharata text. Of course, we have to look at those which are relevant and in the context of Mahabharata war. Because the reason I mentioned this is, Mahabharata is what? Mahabharata is a itihasa, which has all the contemporary things happening to Mahabharata, but it also recalls many historical events much prior to Mahabharata. And there are some people, I don't know if you know them, and their names are not important for many reasons, but um, just because they happen to know Sanskrit, just because they happen to know some aspect of astronomy, just because they confuse astronomy with astrology, what they have done is they have taken some astronomy descriptions which is not relevant to Mahabharata war, even from Mahabharata text, and made a joke of themselves or made an ass of themselves. Okay, so therefore I'm just mentioning it. But practically, if you take all the relevant descriptions, close to 300, and solve them as a jigsaw puzzle, crossword puzzle, for Mahabharat, the year comes to 5561 BCE, the year of Mahabharat war, and we also get specific dates. I mean, the Mahabharata evidence is so powerful, so precise that we can actually find out the first day of the Mahabharat war, the last day of Mahabharat war, which is kind of obvious. If you get the first day right or the last day right, you can get the previous 18 days or the post 18 days. So that's 16 October to 2nd November 5561 BCE. And just for many people sometimes don't understand BC, before Common Era, for their benefit. So if somebody wants to know how long ago it happened, you take that 5561 and add to that the current year, like in this case right now, 2026. So we will say 7,587 years ago.
Sure. And then, sir, what is the method that you used to find these
A
dates?
method to do this? Yeah. So, well, there is only one method, by the way. It's like even people, I mean, so your question is correct. But people say, oh, so which method? And so, no, let me split that. So, what happens is, as far as the framework goes, for example, modern science, we'll call it the logic of scientific method. The best philosopher of science, as far as the Western science is concerned, of the last 400 years, 500 years, because that's how long the Western science has existed. Yes, there are Greek influence and whatnot, but those are very similar to what even by the Western definition they will call it pre-modern or something like this. So we'll just take the modern science. And Sir Karl Popper will describe the method as triangulation of explanation, prediction, testing in the context of a theory, in the context of background knowledge. And why are you doing this? To solve a certain problem. So just take our example. So when did Mahabharat war happen? So to solve this, my hypothesis, my theory was that all astronomy descriptions of Mahabharata text are descriptions of Mahabharat times. Now, no, I mean, this is such a simple, unique, universal, not unique, universal global statement that nobody will have any objection to it. Otherwise, it defeats the purpose of what Mahabharata is. Okay. Now, people may argue that there are actually people who will say lots of additions were made to Mahabharata and stuff like that. Now, sometimes the additions do get made, that's not an issue. But those people, these are famous Indologists, okay, both of the pro-Indic side and the anti-Indic side, who actually carelessly and casually talk such nonsense. Because as soon as you go and ask them, okay, and give me which one is the addition and what's your evidence, they just simply run away. They just scoff. They just change the subject, which in the language of a Nyaya Darshana, it says Jalpa Vitanda Hetva Bhasa Chala Jati. Basically, they make a fool of themselves. Unfortunately or fortunately for them, most common people do not understand even these basics of this Nyaya Darshan, how to think properly, how to draw the inferences properly. So they sometimes carry the day, The joke, somebody else gets criticized. But the method is so problem is when did the Mahabharata war happen? My hypothesis is astronomy descriptions of Mahabharata are descriptions of Mahabharata times. The reason I made this hypothesis that started with that Arundhati Vasishtha observation, because how do I explain it? Well, I said it has to be a visually observed phenomenon at the time of Mahabharata. So therefore, Mahabharata descriptions of astronomy are astronomy descriptions of Mahabharata times, right? Then immediately we know that now we can only extract the evidence which is astronomy in nature. That amounts to 300. So that is the one point of the one corner of the triangle. Now, how do I objectively test it? I objectively tested each one of them, sometime individually, sometime in a group and with association in a certain sequence. And every time it leads you to certain inference. So I'll just give you, say, example. See, Arundhati Vasishtha, after 15 years when I deciphered it, what it said is that this was only possible before 4500 BC, which is to say 6500 years ago, and not any time after. And it was only possible after 10,000 BC. So there was a time period of about 5500, something like that, years, only when it's possible. Now you may ask the question, is this just a coincidence? So you, as a rule, you have to continue to look at all the evidence. And the other Bhishma Nirvana evidence gave me even a better answer, which is to say, and it overlaps. It says, hey, this is only possible between 7000 BC, 5000 BC. And then when I look at the planetary evidence, there is like about 50 descriptions of 5 planets. And I don't know exact number, but about an additional 50 descriptions of sun and moon through that whole time. So take about 100 descriptions of 5 planets plus sun and moon. And when you put them together, the year you get is 5561 BC. And then rest of the 200 plus additional astronomy evidence also corroborates that particular date. So there is no doubt, there ought to not have any doubt in anybody's mind about the robustness of this particular number, 5561 BC.
Okay. So on your work, sir, has there been any criticism from other historians? And if so, what do you think was the strongest criticism?
Okay, so well, has there been a criticism? Yes, there has been. In fact, there needs to be, because see, if there is no criticism, whatever you have done is not important, right? People say, "Oh, whatever the hell he has done, let it be." How does it matter? Well, here it matters. And you know what? There are, in the last 400 years, there are about 140 different Mahabharata dating researchers who have come up with practically those many dates. Even if you take our current times, like right now, the living Mahabharata dating researchers, I would say there are at least about 30. And those 30 people have 30 different dates. So now the question you ask is there is a criticism? You will find the date that I figured out is by what, 2011. Frankly, it was also figured out by great Mahabharata dating researchers, and actually a researcher of a amazing kind beyond just the Mahabharata dating. He's no more Dr. P.V. Vartak, Padmakar Vishnu Vartak. And I consider him as my influence, great influence, also like a guru. Now, I have shown some of his dates for the Mahabharata war, like the pre war events and post war events are actually wrong. I have shown that his dates are wrong. I consider him a guru, by the way, a great guru, and much bigger than what I have done in terms of his amazing work. Not many people even know his name. So why does this happen? Because, whatever sometimes glitters, people think that's a gold, and then things go on. So even the existing 30 Mahabharata dating researchers and their dates, you will not find so much criticism of their dates as much as you will find about my dates. And that is very much welcome. The reason is this Arundhati Vasishtha actually has shocked everyone. Okay, the all existing Mahabharata dating researchers, or even there are some fools who came out after, and they fight this Arundhati Vasishtha day and night, and they better fight. Okay, because as soon as moment they show the awareness of the understanding of the AV observation, their game is over. They are out of the game for the Mahabharata dating. Their date is like nobody's taking seriously right now. They are just making a last minute effort. So, yes, to answer your question, there was a criticism, there was a lot of critic. And I'll tell you, see, there is a difference between critique and criticism. Criticism can be useful. I mean, it's general useful. It's useful for making people aware of it. But in most cases, criticism is like comes from a very careless attitude. The person doesn't put any investment in understanding it, doing a purva paksha. Whereas critic is like the person. So I got a lot of critic. I mean, I'll mention just one person like Prabhakar Fadnis. And so this is early, maybe more than 12, 13 years ago. And he looked at it, he read it in a detail, and he gave a very specific critique. Look, here you have said this, your translation is wrong. This is the translation. And then he would ask me, so now that the translation is different, what does it means for your date? So we went through actually many such things. And let me also mention, because there are very foolish Sanskrit experts. Do you know what they do? My translations, they say this translation is wrong. Nilesh doesn't know Sanskrit, which is actually correct. And still, I'll tell you, I know Sanskrit more than many Sanskrit experts, but that's just another subject. But they are right at times. They will say this translation is not correct, but they think I did the translation. And I should make it clear that that is not my translation. That is actually a translation of many Sanskrit experts. Okay, like a likes of Geeta Press, likes of Kishore Mohan Ganguly. Okay, many. I mean, just take any translation. I have taken possibly every possible translation in English, Hindi, Marathi that is available to me, when I did this. So this is also very funny, so that is a criticism. They quickly, carelessly jump and criticize me for the translation, which is not mine. So there was a criticism on the translation. Then there was a critique, as I said, of specific translation, which I agreed. I said, yes, the translation I used is wrong. I revisited, and I'll tell you, and this is a very wonderful news, and this is happening over last 15 years. Every single time when I received a correction, which I duly acknowledged, revisited that particular observation, it made the case for 5561 BC is even stronger. So to answer your question, yes, there is a criticism and there is a critic, and every time it has led to the strengthening of 5561 BC.
And so the conventional idea would be that around till 10,000 years ago, we were all hunter-gatherers, and around then the
Hmm.
Ice Age started ending, and we started moving towards agriculture, and then so on and so forth. The evidence from your work would suggest otherwise. In that context, what was going on in the rest of the world at that time, sir?
Okay, so the evidence, of course, based on Mahabharata dating, and we didn't talk about Ramayana, and we may not talk about Ramayana much in this episode, anyways.
Hmm.
Ramayana is like 14,000 years ago. The methodology is exactly the same, except the baseline text is Valmiki Ramayana as opposed to Mahabharata. 600 plus astronomy descriptions. Otherwise, everything remains the same in terms of theory and method and whatnot. Now, your question is the conventional belief. Now, we have to take this as a belief, okay, even like likes of Yuval Harari, in his Sapiens talks about agriculture beginning in 10,000 years ago. It's a belief because you start asking for a question, evidence, and what evidence they have. Actually, there is a sufficient evidence that goes back way beyond 10,000. Even just in a Indian subcontinent, if you go to Lahore Dev, this is in Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, that area, the evidence goes to 10,000 plus years. If you go to Mehergarh in Balochistan, the agriculture evidence goes back to 7,000 BC, which is 9,000 years. But people may say, okay, well, isn't that 10,000 years ago? Well, if you go to Jwalapuram or based some evidence based on some of the studies, agriculture studies, um, my friend Anil Suri is also chemical engineer, works in Denmark. He has shown the like reviewed peer reviewed papers where the evidence goes back to about 16,000, 18,000 BC in India. And if you take the Indian subcontinent, I just recently visited Sri Lanka and I had a wonderful podcast with a Sri Lankan individual there where I refer to again the peer reviewed, because the reason I mentioned peer reviewed, I couldn't care less, because if there is evidence that is verifiable, it doesn't matter whether it's peer reviewed or not. But there are very many fools among us, who have a very wrong, faulty idea of what peer reviewed paper is. So therefore, I'm mentioning it. But therefore, I'm saying it's a peer reviewed paper. I think it's a Ratna Tilake and Chris Hunt, where they have shown evidence of, like, this is in Payan shelters in Sri Lanka, evidence of harvesting, evidence of storage, evidence of cooking, all of this going back to, now listen to this, 45,000 years ago. If you go to Syria, Jordan, okay, now the quick name is not coming to me. The name will come to me after our podcast is over, but I've given many talks about it. Um, I may get that culture's name. Uh, it's not coming to me right now. But in the Syria, Jordan area, this is research done some 100 years ago, 1928, by a British lady, where you have a evidence of sophisticated agriculture, no ifs, no buts, going back to 15,000 BCE. So what are these people talking? So that's one. But just not the research limited to Mahabharata and Ramayana. If you look at now, so that made me explore many other areas, and my co-researchers like Rupa Bhatti, Jeevan Rao, and there are many others, archaeologically also people are exploring it around the world. So we have here this Jwalapuram taking us to human presence 75,000 years ago in India. You go to Gobekli Tepe, that goes to 11,000 years. There are paintings in the caves that are dated to I forgot, like 41,000 years in Indonesia and so on. So it is there. I mean, China also will have, as more research comes up. So the conventional must go away, because conventional is careless. At least the way the academia has done, academia is hanging on to it. Like most academics, at least in this area, are almost praying, let them retire, or let them vanish eventually. Because even in science, unfortunately, even the hard science, I'm not talking of this anthropology business, but even the hard science, Max Planck said how science progresses, and bit humorously, but realistically, he said it progresses one funeral at a time, because it's a human mind. That human mind is also, I mean, scientific mind should be pliable and willing to change, but many people have a struggle giving up whatever research they have done when it's shown to be faulty. It's not easy for a human mind to reject it or to give it. So we should understand that. And that's why it is taking, so the academia is not waking up even now to this.
Sure. And sir, what would you say is some of the differences in lifestyle of people back then versus now? Something that we can learn from them, maybe?
Well, we can learn a lot, depends on what aspect of it we want to look at it. So let's take two or three. One thing is the 500, last 300, 400, 500 years of modern science, Western modern science development, and the technology that has come up with it. And we just growing up, like all of us, like let's say less than 100-year old, so our understanding of what the world was is very lopsided, so we see these products of industrialization, and therefore it's also a notion. So, oh my god, like you say, go back 500 years or before, and the life must be like a very rudimentary, and no technology, no sophisticated gadgets, no smartphone, no electricity, no steam engines, no aeroplanes. That's how our image is, and therefore we have a trouble sometime grasping it. And therefore the importance of the Itihasa texts like Mahabharata and Ramayana is phenomenal, because let's take Mahabharata. Now, it's proven not just based on astronomy, based on multidisciplinary scientific evidence. Like, I'll just name it so that we don't have to go into the details. But geology, geophysics, geochemistry, hydrology, sedimentology, climatology, oceanography, physical anthropology, archaeology, genetics, you just name it, and there are many more. If the evidence exists and we can match it with the Mahabharata or Ramayana description, they always take us appropriately to 7,500 years ago, 14,000 years ago. And there are much older evidence going back to 30,000, 50,000, and so on. But let's just stick to Mahabharata, Ramayana. So just take Mahabharata and Ramayana. So let's take like clothing. Okay. We don't hear explicitly mention of cotton in Ramayana. Now, that's not to say the cotton did not exist. Okay. Let me be very clear, because absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. But at least we don't see description, but we see descriptions of silk multiple times in Ramayana. Now, Ramayana also I have decisively shown to be 14,000 years ago. No ifs, no buts, and it's my open challenge to anyone inside academia, outside academia, doesn't matter which ecosystem. It's an open challenge, and we can do a debate on your podcast, if anyone is
Sure.
willing. Now, there are certain conditions they have to satisfy, because many fools just pop up and say, "Oh, I want to debate." And they say, when I don't entertain them, they say, "Oh, Nilesh ran away." Let me tell you, all the debates about the dating of Mahabharat that exist in the YouTube world, there are about 8 or 10. Each one of them has Nilesh in it. So Nilesh does not run away. But there has to be some sense. I mean, there are utterly nonsensical fools there, who do not understand what science means, do not understand what it means to make a claim. So anyone cannot just come and say, okay, let's debate. There is some basic groundwork that has to happen. But back to your question. So Ramayana mentions silk. That tells us that silk is around the world. I don't mean just India, for definitely 14,000 plus years ago. Multiple references. Now Mahabharata times. Now Mahabharata, whether specifically mentions or cotton or not, forget it. But now we have a archaeology evidence going back to Mahabharata times, 5,500 BCE, the same time, and something very fascinating. This is a fossilized kind of evidence in a pot, a piece of cloth, kind of fossilized or deteriorated, found in Israel, by the way. The dating of it goes to 5,500 BC, that is the Mahabharata time, 7,500 years ago. And when they did the analysis, what they have is, see, analysis process of science is neti neti, not this, not this, not this. So they realize that this is not an Egyptian cotton, this is not a local cotton. They say it's not an indigenous cotton. And what they have found out, or what they have inferred, is that this is an Indian cotton. So Indian cotton is there in Israel from India 7,500 years ago. Now, you ask the question, how was the lifestyle? Because this is extremely consistent with the technology, extremely consistent with the navigation evidence that we have in India going back to 20,000 plus years, extremely consistent with the ability of Indians to navigate around the world in a sophisticated fashion because of the sophisticated astronomy that goes back to 40,000 and 60,000 years. I'm talking of Indian astronomy, sophisticated enough that they can travel long distances. Okay. So this all comes together. And this is not only through the ocean. By the way, there is a land trade, and I have talked about it, where you have the trade of silk, the colors, the pigments, the precious stones. And this going from, say, at least the evidence we have is going from, say, Shanghai on the east side with India and the silk route and cotton route and coloring route and precious stone routes in the India at the center, and going to like west of Iran. And this was, in a practical sense, it was that greater India. So I'm not saying Shanghai was India, but my point is Tibet was very much India. And culturally, the China, Korea, Philippines, Indonesia, and all the areas like all the way to Saudi Arabia, Turkey, all of this was actually very well connected.
Hmm. I think we are approaching the end of the podcast. So I just want to wrap up by asking that when it comes to history, we see two groups of people. The first group find it interesting. The second group will ask, what's the point of knowing the history? Like, why do we have to care? So why should we know our history, sir?
Very good. So again, history, I mean, history literally, I don't know why people should care. Well, there is a very usefulness to it, because in a Western sense, history is like a chronological, this happened, this king ruled for this time, then this king happened, and this another dynasty came on board. That's the nature of it. Or this discovery was made at this time, and then whatever different things happen, like the printing press, so that's how they will talk about it. Now, it has its tremendous use. But in the Indian context, it's also important to understand what is itihasa. Now, there is a lot of commonality. So, itihasa translated as history is not necessarily wrong. But we have to be also very careful in making everyone aware that, look, I'm okay with you translating his itihasa as a history, but that's not the whole picture. So let's quickly look at history, I mean, the itihasa, and that could be our last question and answer there. Ityasa is defined in an Indian context in a very interesting way. It says Dharmartha Kama Mokshanam Upadesha Samanvitam Purvavrittam Kathayuktam Itihasam Prachakshate. So Itihas is that particular thing which is based a grantha, a kavya, mahakavya, epic, whatever people want to call it. It may be written in a poetry, it may be written in a prose, it may be a oral transmission tradition like a povada in Maharashtra. It doesn't matter. The point is, it is a text, it is a composition based on a historical event, but told to us in an interesting way, kathayuktam, okay, so that it is easy to remember. It is easy to remember the essence of it. And what is the objective of this? It's a upadesha samanvitam. It's supposed to act as a guidebook. Okay, as a, I call it a encyclopedia of case studies. You know how the people of our ancestors they encountered the problems, how they faced it, and doesn't mean they always would have done it right. That is the mistake to think in a very idealized way. They did everything right. No, they may not have, but they did a right for whatever circumstances they had to face. So with available resources, they did it. Like Japanese came up with a lean manufacturing and Six Sigma and whatnot, just to address the issues, the challenges with whatever resources they had. So, but we get to study how they did it and we can learn from it. That's why it's a guidebook. And for what? Which is for the four Purushartha, Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. In a simple way, I say Dharma is like optimum living, the best optimum way of living, how to achieve that. Artha is like prosperity, achieving prosperity, which is what we talked about, this business and agriculture and trade and whatnot. The Artha is that. The Kama is fulfilling our desires. And then Mukti is basically having a blast, while doing all of this, having that fulfilled life, having the joy, having the happiness. So that is the purpose. And therefore, there is only, even that may be enough reason for people who have not read Mahabharata or Ramayana to go to Mahabharata or Ramayana with appropriate translation and start reading it.
That was a fascinating episode, sir. Thanks for joining us today.
Namaskar. Thank you.